Hey everyone, Coral System here. Today I wanted to talk about in video about autism. Now, as most people know, that my autism diagnosis is a little bit unique. I was told I had autism as a kid. I had issues getting diagnosed due to how my town is. Because a lot of the autism centers would only do an evaluation under different circumstances, and I didn't meet those circumstances, and I can talk about that a bit more in a bit. Now, as the years have gone by, through evaluations, I was not diagnosed through the ADOS test, which I would need to have in order to get an IEP to go back to college, which I am working on. I was diagnosed through the DSM-5 standard of autism, so I have a diagnosis, but I don't have the diagnosis I need in the type of diagnosis I need in order to get the accommodations for when I go back to school. So I kind of have a diagnosis, but I don't have a diagnosis at the same time. But for all of my doctor's purposes, it is in my chart, I am diagnosed. But for college standards, I don't have the proper what they want for me to have as a diagnosis in order to go back to college. But I'm rambling, I'm sorry. But I want to talk a bit more about how my autism has affected my life, especially being someone who is assigned female at birth. It can be a little bit of an odder circumstances. So that's my first point. As usual, I have the bullet points next to me because I have short-term memory loss. So if I don't have bullet points next to me, I tend to forget what I was doing. So I showed signs as a kid, as most autistic people do. As a kid, I was very over-emotional, and by that I mean I didn't regulate my emotions well. I would cry for no reason. I would get very into meltdowns. I was a lot more sensitive, and it had to do a lot with the fact that since I didn't understand social situations, I internalized a lot of things. And I would get very overwhelmed and upset and frustrated, and I show my frustration by crying. So a lot of things would make me upset very easily. I've always liked small spaces, which kind of the opposite of claustrophobia, which is common for autistic kids. Small spaces tend to make us feel more secure. It provided a safety net, so that's why things like weighted blankets can help. Also, I would remember always having a box in my room that I would go in because it was small and safe and secure, and it helped a lot, especially with sensory issues. Touch aversion was the first thing my mom noticed. My mom noticed that I could never make eye contact and I would have difficulties communicating. I never had issues with speech, and a lot of the earlier signs like speech and stuff like that, I think my mom being an English teacher, a special ed English teacher, had a lot of influence on that because she knew ways to teach kids with autism, and that's how she knew how to get me into special therapies so early on, because she could recognize what was going on with me. But I was extremely touch averse. As a baby, as an infant, as soon as I was born, she couldn't pick me up. I would start screaming. I've never been able to be touched. It makes me physically very uncomfortable and very uneasy having any sort of physical contact. Sensory issues, so loud noises, fabrics. I couldn't wear backpacks as a kid because the fabric would send me into overload. I couldn't wear stockings, which was an issue because my parents would make me wear them to church, and I would be crying the entire time because I would just be so overwhelmed by the sensory of that fabric. I would always have earplugs. As you can see even here in most of my videos, these blue earphones aren't connected to anything. I wear these headphones 24/7 when the camera's off, when I sleep, everything, which isn't the healthiest for me. I've gotten ear infections, but I wear earphones out everywhere 24/7, and even in these videos, which some people have thought they were connected to my phone, it isn't. What I do is I wrap them around my head so that the cord doesn't get stuck on things, and that's just how I wear them because it blocks out a lot of the noises. Because part of autism with sensory noises, and I also have misophonia, which can happen with people with autism, which means misophonia is actually, they're doing more research into it, but they think it's a form of synesthesia where certain types of noises will give me an extreme reaction to them, usually anger, disgust, fear, avoidance. But that's separate from my autism. But loud noises, also people with autism tend to hear better than others. So for example, what neurotypical people or people without that don't have a neurodivergence in their brain tend to not hear a lot of things that autistic people can hear. For example, I can hear the buzzing of electricity, and that's a common complaint for autistic people. It's one of the factors they look out for when looking for people with autism, is if they complain about certain noises that other people can't hear. Electricity, buzzing of the fridge, like low humming, a bunch of different things. Foods is a big one, and that's why also going into food sensory issues, autism and an eating disorder called ARFID, or Avoidant Restrictive Eating Disorder, is something that can happen a lot with people with autism, because of ARFID is avoiding and restricting, not due to weight concerns, not due to body dysmorphia, but due to the aversion of food. And a lot of it, there's a common comorbidity of ARFID in people with autism. But foods, the textures, smells, anything. With autism sensory issues, any of the senses can be affected. For me, noises and textures have always been the big ones, but also visuals can sometimes send me into overload, and smells have gotten worse since my pregnancy. And since my pregnancy, smells have developed into more of a stronger thing for me to send me into overload. OCD characteristics is another one that a comorbidity of autism can be OCD, and a lot of people with autism also do show a lot of characteristics of OCD. But the main difference is people with OCD usually do the things because of anxiety, and people with autism do the rituals. For autism, it's rituals. For OCD, it's a compulsion. People with autism do their rituals to prevent the anxiety from happening, but people with OCD usually do the compulsions. Now I have both, but with OCD, it's doing the ritual, doing the compulsions to prevent what they think is an irrational fear from happening. So be it they think that someone will break into the house, be it they think the world's going to end, be it, and it doesn't have to be some huge catastrophic thing, but it's something that causes them a lot of stress, that's an intrusive thought that they are trying to prevent. So also another thing is, for example, I have dermatillomania. Dermatillomania is a disorder that is a subset of OCD, and it's the compulsive picking of things. Also I think it's called dermaphasia is the other one I have, and it's the same thing but with chewing. So I have scarring on my lips and scarring on my fingers because it's the compulsive chewing and the compulsive picking. Now with people with autism, a lot of the times they do it because it's a I think the body repetitive focus behaviors, so BRFD. I'm forgetting part of that acronym, but I'm planning on doing a separate video on that, actually. Oh, BFRB. I actually have this down there that I was going to talk about, that I can talk about a bit later. But those are also play into the OCD type characteristics, but manifest differently with autism. We do it for different reasons than when it happens in OCD, but they are heavily connected with each other. Not being able to tell sarcasm. I used to get into a lot of fights when I was little, especially with my siblings, because I come from a very sarcastic family, and obviously, with autism, that doesn't mix well. I rely heavily on context clues, but sometimes that even can't help me, because when someone's being sarcastic with me, I take it as them mocking me, which is a lot of times online. I'll have to ask clarifying questions a lot because I don't want to jump to the assumption of something when it's not true. But it's something that has influenced me a lot, and it influences me in different ways too, because a lot of the times when I was being bullied, I didn't recognize that I was being bullied, because I couldn't tell jokes. I couldn't tell they were joking with me. I couldn't tell they were being sarcastic. I take things at face value. And I give things at face value. I'm brutally honest with people, because I don't take things that I can't tell jokes, and I can't tell sarcasm, and I have difficulties picking up on social cues that the average person would be able to understand ideally. Issues understanding social concepts. Yep. That plays into a lot of the social cues. It also manifests a lot in sayings. So, like, my partner's family comes from the South, and so they have a lot of sayings that I have a horrible time understanding, but I've gotten a lot better throughout the years, especially talking with my mom and her helping me explain things to me, where I can get sayings now and I understand what they mean, because those are always the same. Stuff like sarcasm and things I don't understand, because those are always changing. There's so many ways to do it. But things like sayings are more easier for me to understand, because those are always set and they always mean the same thing. Avoiding eye contact. Avoiding eye contact is a big one, especially, it doesn't even have to be directly eyes, so to speak. Even cameras, I have difficulties looking directly into the camera, so I'll oftentimes look everywhere else. And that can cause a lot of issues in a lot of different ways. For example, a lot of times when people look for people lying, they look, not maintaining eye contact. That could really cause a lot of issues, because a lot of things that you would check for in people who are nervous or not being truthful or being deceptive in neurotypical people are stuff that autistic people and neurodivergent people do, just as a baseline. And even in cameras or Skype calls, I cannot look the person in the eye, even though it's not directly eye contact. It causes a lot of issues in society because, for example, in job interviews, I usually am very upfront on the fact that I am not neurotypical, so that they understand if I'm not maintaining eye contact, it's not because I'm trying to be rude, it's because maintaining eye contact causes me to be physically extremely uncomfortable. It just causes extreme bouts of anxiety. Excel at reading. So this is the thing I wanted to talk about earlier when I was saying that certain criteria in order to get the testing as a child. The reason they didn't immediately do the testing as a child was because the foundation, there's a couple near me. There was only 2 at the time. I am 20, so things have changed. In the past 20 years, there have been more foundations, which is how I was able to get diagnosed with the DSM-5, and I'm able to start the process of going through the ADOS test. But when I was a kid, there was only 2 autistic foundations around us, and the criteria in order to do that is I had to have difficulties with speech, so either speech impediment, delayed speech, which I didn't exactly have. My speech issues were manifested in different ways that people didn't recognize was off immediately. And also, I was deemed too smart to be autistic because, now this is something that can happen commonly in autistic people, I excelled at reading. So my special interest as a child actually was reading, and it always has been English, ironically enough. But so I was able to read at a higher level. I was able to actually test, when you're in elementary school, they test your reading levels periodically to see what grade level you read at. From about 4th grade, I was testing out at college levels, because they go up to high school levels. So I was testing above that in reading comprehension. So they deemed me too intelligent to be able to take the autism test, even though I was showing extreme deficits in math, history, or social studies at the time, because this was elementary school, I was a child, and math, social studies, and extreme deficits in social settings. But because I was able to read at a comprehensive level, and because I was good at masking, and being able to force myself to talk to others, they deemed that I wasn't in enough of a deficit to be able to take the autism test. Echolalia and echopraxia. Now that's the thing that I was talking about, where my difficulties in talking manifest in different ways. So people can obviously tell that I had difficulties in communication. Echolalia is the repetitive repeating of words, be it immediate echolalia, where if you say a phrase to me, I will repeat it, or delayed echolalia, where I will repeat something that I will hear. It happens in front of people, it happens alone, and it happens internally, so in my head, in my internal monologue. So a lot of times as a kid, my echolalia was more delayed. So my parents would often see me off talking to myself, and it would be me repeating words to myself that I've heard, or me randomly repeating phrases. And echopraxia, where it is the same repetitive thing, but it's with facial expressions and mannerisms. So if someone makes a specific facial expression, I, without realizing, will repeat that and mimic them without knowing. So that is something I still have issues with, echolalia more than echopraxia. The other one I have, which I don't know if I put it on this list actually, is nonverbal. It didn't. So as a kid, I was always labeled as shy. So I didn't really have a need to communicate a lot. People gave me more of a pass of being shy and not communicating a lot and just keeping to myself. So at times when I would have issues of being, because I wasn't immediately nonverbal, I'm semi-verbal. So usually under times of extreme stress or when I'm overwhelmed, I will go nonverbal and I cannot talk at all, and I will even sometimes at times be catatonic. But my issue is more, and always has been, with being nonverbal. So as a kid, when you're labeled as shy and you don't have that expectation to talk as much, when you have issues with being nonverbal, it's not as noticed. So because I was still semi-verbal, people didn't take that as a red flag. So that was another reason that prevented them from testing me, because my deficits in communication were not that of the norm. Extreme apathy. As someone who has autism, I can often come off as being antisocial, and people have mistook me for having antisocial personality disorder. I am being evaluated for antisocial characteristics, just in case, but there are cases of people with autism having issues with apathy. Now, there is a difference between emotional apathy and cognitive apathy. Emotional apathy is the ability to emotionally connect with someone and be empathetic have the ability to feel empathy through your emotions, so you can feel and understand what they're going through, and cognitive empathy, where it's logically knowing what they might be feeling and what they might be going through, even though you can't emotionally feel it. Now, with me having issues with emotional apathy, I cannot feel what another person is going through. I can't have that emotional connect. But cognitively, I can logically understand what someone is going through. So, for example, when my friend's parent passed away, I couldn't emotionally know what they were going through. I couldn't emotionally feel what they were going through. I couldn't have that connection. But cognitively, I can logically understand that death, usually the 5 stages of grief, and I can understand that they were grieving, and I could understand they were not okay, and that they were not in a good place, and probably very sad or very angry. And it also is very dependent on social cues, which I'm not good at, but context clues. So if someone is yelling and throwing things or seeming very short and short-tempered, I can cognitively understand that they're angry. Sometimes with missing social cues, I'll miss some of those signals, and I might react inappropriately because I don't understand or I miss out on those factors. Stimming. Stimming is short for self-stimulating behaviors. So a lot of when people think of stimming, it's flapping hands or shaking head. Now, stimming can manifest in that way. I have been known to do this a lot when I stim, but stimming can also be harmful. Now, the reason people stim is to regulate the emotions, because a lot of autistic people get very, very excited, or they get overwhelmed, and they don't know how to release that feeling and that energy inside them, so they will do self-stimulating behaviors to help calm them down. Now, they aren't always pleasant. They can be anything, really, from a lot of kids, when they're small, they'll have more blinking stims or spinning stims, but also there can be a lot of harmful stims, such as self-harm stims, hitting their head or hitting other people, which is something that people can work on through therapy to even substitute stims to help with that, but it is something that does happen. I have a history of not good stims, but I have worked really hard on trying to find substitute stims to help with that. Special interests, a lot of people know about. It's something that it's things that autistic people tend to cling to and become very, very, very knowledgeable and fixated on those things. When I was really little, it's always been, and now you can have multiple simultaneously, but usually there's main ones. Mine has always had things to do with medicine. When my first hyperfixation was definitely, I read from a very early age, was reading and more like dolls, stuff like that. But then my first actual medical, because they've been repeatedly medical, was in 5th grade. I started getting really into neurology and understanding the brain. I did my 5th grade report on epilepsy. And then after that, it went from neurology to ears, nose, and throat, ENT, to to dermatologist, then emergency medical technician, to now psychology. And psychology started last year, although I've always as a kid had a love of understanding how the brain worked, so it kind of just came full circle at that point. Can't recognize emotions that well. That's another big one. having issues with recognizing emotions, and that kind of ties into the empathy a little bit. So, for example, I might be very uncomfortable around people crying, and I don't recognize my own emotions, and I don't recognize the emotions in others immediately, which will require me a lot to ask clarifying questions. Tics. Some autistic people have issues with tics, and tics are more commonly associated with Tourette's, but tics are things that can happen in a multitude of disorders. People with anxiety can have anxiety-related tics. When they're super anxious, they will have tics. It's not just Tourette's. So I have some tics, but a lot of mine are not as noticeable. A lot of mine are motor, but when I'm extremely stressed out, I will have more vocal ones. But I'm also very good at editing videos and cutting things out at times, but I don't usually. But a lot of my tics are either hand-related or small ones that aren't always visible. Sometimes if you look closely in my videos, you might see my eyes twitching or blinking weird, kind of moving my head oddly, or I sometimes have tics with my hands that I'll kind of keep one of my hands off screen in case it happens. But they aren't horribly noticeable, luckily, in my case. Masking I talked about. Masking is pretending to be neurotypical, which a lot of people with autism do, and some people have an ability to mask more well than others. I'm not good at masking. Usually it's pretty obvious to people that I am not, they might not jump to autistic, but they usually recognize very early on from talking to me that my brain is not the same level as theirs. Dissociation is also something that can happen with autism, which they are doing more studies on the links between autism and are autistic people more likely to develop PTSD and dissociative issues because of the fact that people with autism they have found can dissociate easily. Meltdowns. Meltdowns is when people are overwhelmed, or when autistic people are overwhelmed emotionally or by sensories, and most people think that they're temper tantrums, but in reality it's being so overwhelmed that you just break down, and it can manifest in different ways in different people. BFRB, that's the word I was looking for, body-focused repetitive behaviors. Now, when I was talking about the OCD and dermatillomania, dermaphasia, trichotillomania, which is hair pulling, and different types of those are all subsets of OCD, but are body-focused repetitive behaviors, and autistic people will often do it as a form of self-regulation and self-soothing, so almost like a stim, but a bit different. And it is a subset of OCD. It is a disorder. It can't immediately go away, but with therapy it can help treat it. Processing issues. So, your brain processes every sort of stimuli it gets. So, people with autism might have a comorbidity of sensory processing disorder or sensory issues, and what that means is that their brain might not be able to immediately process the stimuli it's receiving in order to give an appropriate response. Example, if I read something, my brain might not immediately understand what it says, so it will not know appropriately immediately what it does. Part of my IEP for college and throughout school was I would have extra time on tests, and I would be able to have someone read questions to me, because with my processing issues, if someone says something to me or if I read something, my brain doesn't immediately understand what it says. It's also why on my IEP it says I can ask clarifying questions, so that when my brain doesn't immediately process it or I get confused, I'll be able to ask in ways that I can process it and understand what it's asking of me. Aggression can be a symptom. Again, autism is a spectrum disorder. Some people might have more deficits in areas that other people don't. I am more of a apathetic and angry person because of the autism, and because that's just how I am, I guess. So when I get overwhelmed or when I'm having issues not understanding things, usually my first reaction is to get angry. It's something that I've worked really hard on, and it's happened less now, but it is something that happens, and some autistic people just get really fucking frustrated and angry. It's a frustrating disorder to have. Avoidance of others. A lot of autistics might try to kind of ostracize themselves from other people, might not have a lot of friends, might not interact with a lot of other people. Not understanding boundaries can be an issue. It doesn't excuse it when you do push boundaries, but it is something that is important to understand and work on. And it doesn't always have to be on purpose. Well, it's not usually on purpose, but I might not understand where the boundaries of certain people are, which is why I tend to take more time to understand people's triggers or ask more questions so I can get a grasp of that, because I might accidentally go too far or push people's boundaries or trauma dump, and I don't immediately recognize that that's wrong. Logical. Some people with autism can be a lot more logical, and that's where me being brutally honest and me not understanding where those lines are comes in. A great example of that is a story that my mom told me of when I was in the psych hospital and they tried to give me a Rorschach test, and I was the first person that the doctor ever had that could not take the Rorschach test. And if people don't know what Rorschach test, it's the ink blot test where you're supposed to see things in the ink blots. And I ended up making this man rage quit because I sat there for 30 minutes just answering every question with, it's an ink blot. It looks like someone spilled ink on it. And I would not answer it because logically that's what it was. I couldn't see anything in it because it was an ink blot. So I'm very, very logical. Explanations and excuses, another one. A lot of people can label someone with autism as trying to make excuses for their behaviors, when in reality we're trying to explain our behaviors. So if I do something wrong, I'm not trying to make excuses, I'm trying to explain my logic behind why I did something that I did, but it can come off as making excuses. Fidget toys are another thing. Fidget toys are a great way for a lot of autistic people to regulate things. So that's kind of how, that's everything on my list. So that is how my autism manifests. Now, it is a spectrum disorder. It's called autism spectrum disorder. So things that I struggle in more, I struggle extremely in social situations. Other people might not have that big of a struggle in, and I might excel in areas that someone else might have a struggle in. For example, my partner also has autism, so my autism manifests in an extremely different way than how my partner's autism manifests. So it's just something to keep in mind. Just because my autism manifests one way doesn't mean that someone else's autism might manifest in a different way. So if anyone ever has any questions about autism or any questions about anything, I am in no way a professional, but I'd be happy to help with resources and give a little bit of an understanding for other people who might have questions about it. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.